Shortly after the wedding, he wrote to his best friend Lem Billings. As Sister Eunice, from the depth of her Catholic wrath, so truly said, it's a horrible thing. But it will be nice visiting her after the war, so we might as well face it. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise, and today we're going to keep going in Ask Not by Maureen Callahan. We're reading about Kik Kennedy today. So the last episode that we read was about Rosemary, and Kik's name came up because when Joe Kennedy wanted to get a lobotomy for Rosemary, Kik was tasked with finding out information about that procedure, and Kik went and looked into it and was horrified. And so she came back and she said, "Mother, that is not something we want for Rosie." And so the family thought they weren't going to do that. But then Joe went ahead and just had the lobotomy anyway, regardless of the fact that his wife and kids were against the procedure and that Rosemary had never given her consent. So it was very disturbing. And if you watched last episode, you saw that even me, with my hard heart, can be moved to tears because I was crying by the end of last episode. So upsetting. But before we get into Kik, I do just want to say that following the reading of the Rosemary chapter, I was just so disturbed by the whole story that I was like, I need to find out more about her story. I mean, it was so horrifying to me that the family could have treated her with such disdain her whole life. And so I went and I listened to several documentaries, and this is the conclusion that I've come to. Number one, Rosemary's condition as far as what her capabilities were in life were far more debilitating than this book led on. She had quite a significant set of difficulties. I think she could have gone on to have a really full life as a teacher's aide, working at a school like Assumption when she had been in England, and that really would have been the perfect place for her to have remained her whole life, working alongside that staff. Unfortunately, the war came, and so the family removed Rosemary from that scenario. But what I think this book leaves out considerably is the fact that the family, her whole life in America, had worked really hard to find her a school that would work for her. And it isn't that they were just trying to shove her off on somebody else, but her differences were significant. And they tried. I mean, I lost count of how many different schools they put her in, trying to find a place that could facilitate a life for her that met her very many needs. She really needed to have somebody with her all the time. Most of the schools that were available for somebody who was a little bit developmentally delayed weren't really productive in helping her to establish a life where she could be independent. And a lot of them just didn't have the resources to help somebody with Rosemary's particular set of needs. But I think it was disingenuous for the author to completely exclude how many times the family had really worked to find a place for Rosemary. Now, it does not at all diminish what Joe did to Rosemary in the end. And I'm not trying to, cast a bright light on this tragic story, because it is a tragic story. The end of it is. But I just think that this author cherry picks so many times when it was always negative. And I think that we don't get the full arc of what happened with Rosemary and the care that the family did show Rosemary. And then the very last story says, they never knew what happened to Rosemary. All the kids didn't know what happened to Rosemary. Yeah, well, they didn't initially because Joe didn't tell them what happened to Rosemary. But then in 1958, when John F. Kennedy was doing his campaign, he went to go visit Rosemary. Now, did he go visit Rosemary because there had been rumors his whole life that his sister was stashed away in Wisconsin? And he's like, I better, cover my ass and go visit my sister. I don't know what his motivation was, but after he went to go see Rosemary, he and the rest of the family and all the siblings really took on a role of trying to, make America a better place for people with disabilities. So it kind of lends you to want to believe, if you want to believe the best in people and give the benefit of the doubt, it makes you think, well, maybe the kids just totally did not know what happened to Rosemary initially. And once they found out, they thought, well, we don't want to be those kind of people. And then set about to try to right the family's wrongs in whatever way they could. I mean, they're not responsible for what Joe did. Nobody in the whole family knew Joe was going to do that. And so, I don't know. I mean, it's like, yeah, this family has some real problems. But a book that only lists all the negative things and then completely glosses over the positive things because that doesn't quite make the point. It's kind of a dangerous book in a lot of ways. And it makes me a little fearful about how much I've put out there that excludes some of the more positive things that would give a better, more nuanced view to the picture. Now, there's no nuance needed for lobotomizing someone. Okay, so let me just be clear about that. But to act like the family had always castigated her, always been annoyed by her, always been disgusted by her, put her out, just Rosemary. I don't know that that's really a true picture, considering all of the work that went into Rosemary's younger life before they went to England. And then, they didn't exclude her from the debutante scenario, and she was allowed to see the Queen. Again, one could argue and say, well, what are they going to do? Not invite Rosemary? That's going to be a lot more noticeable than if they just get her a little bit of training so she can conduct herself in a way that the family would, be proud of, And I think that both things can be true. They didn't want to exclude Rosemary. They were also nervous how Rosemary would do, because Rosemary did struggle with a lot of things. She had to have special shoes because she had difficulty walking. There's just a lot of things that Rosemary was challenged by. And there's a lot of things that they would have needed to get her some resources for. And a family looking for resources is not a family looking to throw their, challenged daughter onto somebody else's backs. But if you don't know how to help your challenged daughter, you need to go, find resources. So I just think that we need to be, this book painted a picture as though the Kennedys couldn't work fast enough to get rid of Rosemary. I just think Rosemary had enough challenges that they consistently were looking for help. Rose, I think, is problematic, the way she acted with that whole camp scenario. Rose did put Rosemary in a camp, did fail to inform the staff what it would be like to have Rosemary there. She lied to Rosemary and told Rosemary, you're going to be a counselor at the camp. You're going to be helping some of the kids. But she wasn't. She was enrolled as a camper. So, of course, that's really confusing for Rosemary to go. And everyone's kind of bossing around and treating her like she's one of the kids because they think she knows she's come as a camper and she thinks she's coming to be a counselor. The whole thing was jacked up and messed up. There were all kinds of things that happened at that camp. The way Rose chose to handle it, like, I'm going to hide out at the spa and make this somebody else's problem. Again, we can make no excuse for that. I think Rose was just very tired. Again, I'm not excusing why she did it. I'm just saying that if you exclude all of the things that the family had done for Rosemary, and then at the very end be like, can you believe her mom did this, but you didn't tell us all the things the mom had done right? I don't think that's a fair picture. Rose should have come and gotten Rosemary, and Rose should not have hidden from the camp what the situation was, and Rose should not have lied to Rosemary about what her position at the camp would be when she went. The whole thing's a hot mess. But let's talk about the hot mess, but then let's also talk about they worked really hard to help Rosemary her whole life. And I just think that was really, it was very selective of Maureen Callahan to tell the story the way she did. So anyway, those are just my points there in case you like me were like so heavily disturbed. The story is still disturbing, but it made me feel better to realize, okay, but during Rosemary's life, they were trying to get her help her whole life. They really were trying. And I don't think the family was disingenuous later on when they came out being like, we care a lot about Americans with disabilities. Because I think some of the siblings were really upset by what had happened to Rosemary, really upset about the handling of their sister, and really wanted to try to help other people in that same scenario. And I don't think it was all political. Maybe it was, but I'm going to choose to give them the benefit of the doubt. Okay, that was a super long intro. I'm sorry, but I felt like it was important. Let's talk about Kik. All right, Kik Kennedy, where are you? Kik Kennedy's story is told underneath this sectioned part. It's the book is divided into parts, and each of these stories are set under certain parts. And the part 4 is entitled The Lonely Graves. And so there's 2 women who are discussed under the Lonely Graves chapter. That would be RFK Jr.'s wife and Kik Kennedy. Somebody said to me the other day, are you just going to skip RFK Jr.'s wife? What's the story there? I'm not skipping it. It's just I'm trying to go from longer stories to shorter stories. So we will be talking about her very soon. But I think this is interesting that there's not one but 2 people whose graves have all but been hidden from public view. And it's very strange, very weird what happened to Kik Kennedy. We talk about Rosemary was cast off, and, Rosemary had deficiencies, so let's get rid of Rosemary. But the way they treated Kik is also really wild. Okay, so this story begins by saying Kick Kennedy was already famous when she arrived in England in 1938 at age 18. She and Jack the stars among U.S. Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy's 9 children. Old Joe favored her openly. "All my ducks are swans," he said, "but Kick is especially special." When Jack met Jacqueline Bouvier some 20 years later, he was astounded at the similarities that she had with Kick. The youthful stubbornness, the determination, the snobbery, the love of fashion and horseback riding and swimming. Kick, like Jackie, had gone from debutante of the year to a career in journalism. Like Jackie, Kick was distant from her mother but worshipful of her father. Her easy wit, her vivaciousness made her the star of high society wherever she went, from Paris to London to America. Kick was Jack's equal in every way, except when it came to sex. Her father left porn magazines on Jack's bed, open to particular pages. The nastiness of that. But her mother had a fit when Kick, still a virgin at age 23, fell in love. Kick and Billy were opposites in every way. He was tall, she was tiny. He was slow in thought, speech, and movement. Kick was electric. He had an aristocratic bearing. Kick had no use for any of that, showing her affection through jokes and gentle mockery. She was an American. He was not. She was a Catholic. He was a Protestant. Kick was born Kathleen. He was born William Cavendish, Marquess of Harrington, heir to a mansion in London, a castle in Ireland, descendant of a 17th century namesake who had helped to dethrone a Catholic king. Together, they fit. He quickly became her Billy. Oh, this is fraught with difficulties, isn't it? Kick was the American empress of the jazz age, a screwball heroine out of the Hollywood movies she adored, fond of throwing parties in her father's new residence, a crumbling old pile with 52 rooms and a basement where Joe stashed 2,000 bottles of champagne. Her days were spent shooting grouse, cheering at the races, playing tennis, and attending garden parties at Buckingham Palace or luncheons at St. James's Palace. Her nights were spent in London's poshest clubs, theaters, restaurants, at cocktail parties and castles, with maids attending to tasks grand and small, squeezing toothpaste onto waiting toothbrushes that were angled just so. That is quite a picture of living in the lap of luxury ladies. Would we not love this? I want to spend a life like that. Kick was among the beautiful and privileged youth of England, partying at the edge of the world, losing themselves in midnight strolls through grand topiary mazes on even grander estates, young women in gowns of the finest silk or gossamer chiffon strolling through damp, verdant grass, swinging champagne bottles in one hand and lit cigarettes in the other, the shimmering stars strewn against a velvety night sky in a quiet that would not last. Each night they were drinking away the looming specter of Hitler and the approaching horrors. All you can hear or talk about at this point is a future war, which is bound to come, Kick wrote in September 1938. I'm so darn sick of it. War would mean going back to the States. It would mean losing Billy. Before Billy, Kick had a singular kinship with her mother, Rose. No other Kennedy child defended Rose from Joe's constant womanizing. Now, that loyalty seemed to mean nothing. Kick knew her mother might not approve of Billy's religion, but she never anticipated her mother's cruelty. She never anticipated her mother disowning her. Over a boy who's a Protestant? Of all the things you could disown your daughter for. After all, Rose's own parents hadn't approved of Joe Kennedy, but she'd married him anyway. Was this some particular grievance that Rose had against Kick? Was Kick too much like the boys? Jack, especially? How could Rose believe in a God that would judge another based on mere denomination? And Billy's father was as aghast at the romance as Rose Kennedy. The Devonshires were anti-Catholic. Billy and Kick were, in essence, a Montague and a Capulet. How could their parents care about such things now, with their young lives at stake, the world as they knew it careening toward the abyss? But there was no question that when the war came, Billy would serve in combat. There was also no question that Ambassador Kennedy would order his children back to the States, adults or not, once the war broke out. In fall of 1939, 18 months after docking in England, Kick was back in America. Her first salvo was a thank you letter to her father for giving me one of the greatest experiences anyone could have had. She did not reference the terror she'd experienced. In anticipation of the Blitz, London began going dark in September 1939. A zombie city at night, aerial bombings imminent. There was still nowhere that she'd rather be, her London still a place where, as she wrote, quote, the moon shines through. Can I just say real quick, the reason she wouldn't have mentioned that there had been any terror is that when you were that young, a city going dark in anticipation of a bombing isn't as frightening as it is exhilarating. You don't know anything about loss. You don't know anything about fear. You don't know anything about what war actually feels like. Horror would have been living through the Blitz. Preparing for the Blitz would have been, at that young age, you're living through something historic, and everybody wants to feel like their life mattered and was placed at a time in history when things were, quote unquote, exciting. That's why so many people are coming up with all kinds of petty grievances now and, digging up old wounds of the past and trying to pretend they're present problems, because everybody wants to feel like their life means something and that they're fighting for something in their life. So at this time, when Kik would have been living in London, when they were preparing for the Blitz, there would have been no fear yet, because it's all exciting. She got out before it got scary. Anyway, she says the moon shines through in London, and of course the moon was Billy. Kik bided her time in New York, returning to her former life as just a Kennedy girl, no longer the brash American whose worldview had been broadened and deepened by her British friends, all of whom were won over by her joie de vivre, her unpretentiousness, her willingness to learn and change her mind. Kik's greatest conflict with her father had nothing to do with Billy at all, but with Hitler and America's role in the war. Joe, as U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom, had sought to meet with Hitler and had encouraged appeasement with the Nazis. He thought democracy in Western Europe and America would soon be dead, and that Germany would establish a new world order, one that he, in fact, agreed with. Joe Sr. blamed the, quote, Jew media in the United States, as he wrote to Viscountess Nancy Astor, condemning their coverage of Hitler and his atrocities for setting, quote, a match to the fuse of the world. Side note, let me plug another book we did. Do you guys remember when we did Traitor King about Edward VIII, Wallace Simpson? Do you remember how close Edward VIII was to these same ideals and to the same concept that Nazis would one day take over England and that they would then place him back on the throne? And that Hitler had all but promised that. And that there is mention of the Kennedys and Edward VIII and the entwining views that they both shared. So if you want some more crazy talk about this sort of idea that so many people in the aristocracy had about the Nazis coming, and the shocking way in which they were not appalled by that, go watch the coverage of Traitor King. That book was wild. So good. Anyway, Kik's oldest brother, Joe Jr., admired the Fuhrer as well, writing that Hitler was smart to, quote, seize upon a common enemy, someone of whom to make the scapegoat. Too bad it had to be done to the Jews. The dislike of the Jews, however, he continued, was well-founded. They were at the head of all the big business on law, etc. It's all to their credit for them to get so far, but their methods have become quite unscrupulous. The lawyers and the prominent judges were Jews, and if you had a case against a Jew, you were nearly always sure to lose it. As far as the brutality is concerned, it must have been necessary to use some. Joe Jr., thank the Lord that he never became president. I'm not happy for what happened to Joe. I would have liked him to come to some better revelations before he died, but yeah, that kind of mentality, we don't have any use for that here. Kik's father was grooming Joe Jr. to run for president of the United States, but he would barely stand up for her and for Billy against Rose. Should she have been surprised? Catholicism wasn't their one true religion. Power was. If ever there was a statement to believe, that's it. Kik returned to America believing, unlike her father and brother, that Hitler must be defeated. And she was proud of Billy for enlisting and frantic to see him. At the moment, it looks as if the Germans will be in England before you receive this letter, she wrote to old Joe in May 1940. She reiterated her belief in Britain's moral and military supremacy. I don't know that Britain had military supremacy, but they certainly had moral supremacy. Kik went on to say that, from reports here, they're just about taking over Claridge's now. I still keep telling everyone the British lose the battles, but they win the wars. I've received some rather gloomy letters. Billy's letter was written from the front lines. Daddy, I must know exactly what's happened to them. Is Billy all right? Jack, equally convinced that democracy would not survive World War II, wrote to their father on Kik's behalf. Kik is very keen to go over there, he said, and I wouldn't think the anti-American feeling might hurt her like it might do us, due to her being a girl, especially as it would show that we hadn't merely left England when it got unpleasant. Kik was no girl. She was a woman, braver than her brothers, but she took what she could get. Kik couldn't just wait around like some incipient war widow. She dabbled in schools in New York and in Florida, and in 1941 got a job at the Washington Times-Herald as a research assistant. She found herself drawn to John White, a 30-year-old reporter and inveterate debater. He was also a minister's son, with a snake tattoo on his arm. Oh, how fun and exciting. A minister's son with a snake tattoo on his arm. This guy was Kik Speed, another rebel, another apostate. White liked Kik a lot, but her dogmatic opinion surprised him. Birth control is murder, she'd say. Premarital sex, that was out too. How could such a firebrand be so dogmatic? Everyone knew what the Kennedy boys got up to. Birth control was the least of it. White was even more surprised at how deferential Kick could be toward old Joe, that she wasn't outraged when he ran background checks on her friends and suitors, something White knew about firsthand because old Joe had hired someone to investigate him. Kick's brother Jack was allowed to date whomever he wanted, including their friend and colleague Inga Arvid. Rumor had it Inga Binga to Jack, might be a spy for Germany. But did old Joe care about that? No, he cared that Kick remain a virgin till marriage. And oh, how that frustrated John White. After they went out for dinner or a movie, Kick would sometimes allow John back to her place. She'd let him sit on her bed, rub her back, but nothing else. When White would press for more, Kick would only say, "That's the way it is." White tried to kiss her once. Kick shied away. "I don't want any of this, John," she said. "You must understand. Please don't try. I don't want the thing the priest says not to do." Whether because of her childlike affect or despite it, John fell in love with Kick. They shared newsroom banter right out of the front page. He called her an ignorant, thick-headed Mick, and she called him a shrinking, bald-headed, irritable old man. White often said that Kick was the most fun to argue with because she was always wrong. Kick kept circling back to that birth control argument, and that led her to thoughts of her friends back in England, who told Kick in cables and letters that sex was now the most defiant, life-affirming thing one could do. It led her thoughts of Billy and what sex might be like for them, and what it would be like to see him again. "I'm nearly going mad," she told her father. Jack, now as pessimistic as his father, tried to talk Kick out of it. "I would advise strongly against any voyages to England to marry any Englishman," Jack wrote Kick, "for I have come to the reluctant conclusion that it has come time to write the obituary of the British Empire." Yet, by March of 1942, Jack was off to war. It took Kick another 15 months, but her stubbornness paid off. On June 23, 1943, she boarded the Queen Mary as a new member of the Red Cross, headed to London, to Billy. Okay, and let's just have our little side note chat, shall we? See, because this is what really drives me crazy, and I've said this before in other episodes. Somebody explained to me this ridiculous idea that the girls all have to remain virgins, but the boys can just do whatever they want. How do you remain a virgin if the guys in the world are running around and acting crazy? I'm not opposed to the idea of remaining a virgin until marriage. So, I have very traditional views on that. I really do. But what I'm talking about is, how can you say to your daughters, you guys have to remain virgins, okay? But to my sons, whatever. Like, it's the same act. It's the same act. Like, why is when the girl does it, it's wrong, but when the boy does it, it's like, good for you for being a man? Do you understand that to have sex is for this man to engage with a female? But if we're trying to keep all the females virgins, how does that work? Right? I can understand why John White was like very frustrated with her, because I'd be like, why are you listening to your dad, who his inability to think logically defies anything I've ever seen, to put all this pressure on you, to maintain your sexual purity, but to the boys he's literally living porn magazines out on the bed, turned to the pages he thinks are the most instructional. That's not a household anyone could live in. That would mess you up so much. Okay, but Kick is back in England and she's going to see Billy, and they're going to make this thing for real. So they married on May 6, 1944 in a 7-minute long civil ceremony. Kick wore a knee-length pink crepe dress with tea-length sleeves and a high neck, a copy of one of her own black dresses. Everyone she knew in England, even her milkman, had given Kick their clothing ration coupons for her modest wedding dress, a testament to how much they loved her, this young woman whose wealthy family was so withholding. On her wedding ring, Billy had inscribed, "I love you more than anything in the world." Only one member of her family was present, her brother, Joe Jr., who was serving in London. He had to defend himself for smiling in Kick's wedding pictures. "I saw no point in looking extremely grim throughout," Joe Jr. wrote the family, "so I looked as if I enjoyed it." As far as America was concerned, Joe thought Kick was now royalty, on her way to dizzying heights of glory and power as the next First Lady of the realm. None of it impressed her mother. Rose had taken the advice of one of New York's top newspaper publishers and, as a means of boycotting Kick's wedding without seeming vengeful, had herself hospitalized for 2 weeks. Oh, the passive aggression! And just in case anyone failed to get the message, Rose issued a statement that she was too physically unfit to discuss the wedding with anyone. My health, you understand. When the news reached Kick, it devastated her. She didn't recognize this as histrionics, a temper tantrum meant to shame her. The day after the wedding, Joe Jr. sent his parents a one-line telegram meant to convey Kick's sorrow. "The power of silence," he wrote, "is great." Because she decided to marry somebody who wasn't Catholic? This is not like somebody who believes a different religion. This is a different denomination. I just think that if the Catholics and the Protestants both think that the other one doesn't believe like the right things, I think like let's all go back to the gospel, okay? Let's strip away all of our differences on how we practice the religion. Do we believe the same things? Are we all on the same page there? On our necessity for a savior and on the fact that we have one. Okay, let's start there. Oh, good. Okay, so we all believe. Okay, good. Okay, so let's proceed. I mean, it's like, this is not as though she had just married somebody who had a shrine in his room where he worshipped bread wrappers and Kit Kat bars. I mean, it's like, this is not like a crazy person. I don't understand what the problem is. I do not understand disowning your daughter over this. That is insane to me. But it's not just coming from the Kennedy family. No. Billy's family didn't like her either. A sort of evil influence is how she was described by Billy's father, the Duke of Cavendish, even as she promised to raise his future children as Protestant. But her beloved brother Jack was thrilled for her. Shortly after the wedding, he wrote to his best friend Lem Billings, "As Sister Eunice, from the depth of her Catholic wrath, so truly said, it's a horrible thing. But it will be nice visiting her after the war, so we might as well face it." I think that I think Jack's letters were probably pretty funny. Every little side note that he has about one thing or another is highly entertaining to me. Anyway, Kik had married the love of her life, and, as Jack noted, Britain's most eligible bachelor. She was profiled in Vogue and approached by Life magazine for a story hailing the nuptials as the greatest gesture for Anglo-American relations since the Atlantic Charter. It still wasn't good enough for Rose. Status-conscious Rose strained to be taken as more than a mere lace-curtain Irish. Kik and Billy had just a few weeks before he would be called back to duty. Their wedding night was spent at Compton Place, the Devonshire mansion adorned with Titans Venus and Adonis, the armed warrior escaping Venus's embrace, Cupid asleep under the trees. A suite was ready and waiting for them, and Kik watched as Billy looked at the twin beds that had been pushed together and hastily pulled them apart. Kik later confided to two friends that her wedding night had been a disappointment, that Billy was terribly inexperienced. Oh, Billy, the soldier who ran in fear, the dashing bachelor who was probably a virgin. Oh, yes, what's going on with Billy? Okay, but back to the whole, wedding night virginity thing. Who cares if Billy's a virgin? So are you, Kik. Why can't y'all learn together? Isn't that the whole point? That both of you come into it inexperienced, but you're vulnerable enough that you get to learn with the other person? Do you want... I don't know. It's like, why would you hold that against Billy? What does she bring to the table if that's what's so important to her in this very moment? Okay, I would be disappointed that he would separate the beds and be like, okay, good night, I'm gonna go brush my teeth. See you in the morning. That would be disappointing. But if he was inexperienced, that's not a disappointment. It's what it is. So are you. You can't cast a disapproving glance at that. But the pushing the beds apart thing, that's weird. That's weird that he would do that. But if a coward, isn't he, if he also ran in battle? So he ran away in battle and he ran away from sex? What's going on, Billy? You okay? Maybe. Now that's crazy, right? I can understand wanting to run away in battle. Okay, so I'm not a completely stone-hearted person. I understand the fear of that. I would hope you don't, but I would understand the fear of that. I don't understand any red-blooded male who has never had a chance with a woman, finally gets married to this girl that he seems to be in love with, and then it's like, gonna push those beds apart though. Not doing that. Billy, is everything okay? They moved into a hotel while awaiting Billy's orders. Kik was going to make this marriage work, and she wasn't going to give Rose an inch of satisfaction. She wrote home of the peace that had come over her. "I'm feeling better now than I have since I left America," she said. "This is the first really good rest I have had for a year. I've put on some weight." A dig at her parents who vocally detested the slightest weight gain. "And I'm getting plenty of sleep. Married life agrees with me." They had a brief honeymoon at the legendary Swan Inn, where they were given the best room, running water, fireplace, dinner set out every night. They luxuriated in picnics and bike rides to the countryside and fantasized about their lives after a war that was escalating beyond their summer fields, beyond comprehension. Billy would die just 4 months after the wedding, killed in action by a German sniper. Rose wasn't sorry. Kik had returned to the States on August 16th upon hearing that her brother Joe had been killed while flying in a combat mission. Jack met her at the airport, and Kik collapsed in his arms. Now, not 1 month later, Billy, too, had been killed in combat, shot in the heart in Belgium. She grieved this fresh, unbearable loss keenly and mostly alone, her siblings acting as though nothing was amiss. Except Jack. He sat up with her in a New York City hotel the night she learned of Billy's death. Jack said he'd never experienced a worse night. Can you even imagine the compounding grief? Your brother Joe is killed. A month later, your new husband of 4 months is also killed, shot in the heart by a sniper. And then you can't even grieve with your family because they didn't like him anyway. Because he wasn't Catholic. It's a stupid reason to dislike someone. And I just can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine the pain of having to grieve in silence and knowing that I can't even spill out to you what the pain is because you don't have ears to hear it. Because secretly you're probably glad he died. I will say this about Jack. Jack, for all the things that we heard about him and who he was when he was married to Jackie, and for the many defects of his personality, he does seem to be the most empathetic of the brothers on numerous occasions. Maybe not the most empathetic, but definitely had care and concern for his siblings. Remember what we read about with him and Rosemary? And he would often take her out and make sure she had a good time. And then he'd bring her back home around midnight. Then he'd go back out again, have himself a good time. But he always made sure that some of his friends came and danced with Rosemary so she would feel pretty and have a good time. And he wanted her to have a good time. He looked out for her. And now the situation with Kik, everybody else in the family is like, hey, yeah, Kik, what the hell? And Jack's willing to sit up with her and grieve with her and never castigated her or was like, we disown you, you nasty girl, now that you've been in bed with a Protestant. So ends the story of Billy and Kik. She wrote in her diary, life is so cruel. She treasured a letter that Billy had written to her and reread it often. I have been spending a lovely hour on the ground and thinking in a nice, vague, sleepy way about you and what a lot I've got to look forward to if I come through this all right, he wrote. I feel I may talk about it for the moment as I'm not in danger, so I'll just say that if anything should happen to me, I shall be wanting you to try to isolate our life together, to face its finish, and to start a new one as soon as you feel you can. I hope that you will marry again, quite soon, someone good and nice. What an interesting thing to write to your new bride. You've been married for 4 months, and I do understand that he was at war, and so he felt potentially that he needed to have difficult conversations quickly, not knowing how long he would be able to have them, and just sort of like put it out there because he knew he probably would die. It's definitely more than a possibility. But for somebody who pushed the beds apart and seemed very uncomfortable with sex, it just kind of makes you wonder if that was really what he wanted to do. And it kind of makes you feel like there was a part of him that was relieved that if he died, he could not have to face married life with her. And, so it seems like maybe it was easier for him to say, hey, you know what? You go get married again, please, soon. I hope good things for you. Because I'm sure he did hope good things for her. I don't think he wanted to marry her is what I think. I think he married her because she wanted to marry him. And because if he didn't marry her, what might that say about him? But it feels like there's almost a relief in what he's saying. And he can couch it in these terms of, well, I might die, so just want to let you know. Go and make your own life. And maybe he meant exactly what he wrote. But anyway, back to the story. President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill sent personal condolences, but these were small comfort. Even as a grieving young wartime widow, she was still, in her mother's eyes, a sinner. Rose's rejection stung all the more after Kik received a beautiful letter from Billy's mother, somehow strong enough to console this shattered young woman. I want you never, never to forget what complete happiness you gave him, she wrote. All your life you must think that you brought happiness to one person. He wrote that to me when he went to the front, and I want you to know this, for I know what great conscientious struggles you went through before you married Billy. But I know that it'll be a source of infinite consolation to you now that you decided as you did. All your life I shall love you, not only for yourself, but that you gave such perfect happiness to my son, whom I loved above anything in the world. May you be given the strength to carry you through these terrible months. My heart breaks when I think of how much you have gone through in your young life. What a generous letter from his mother. How kind. She would have been a nice mother-in-law, I think. So Kik returned to England, to the bosom of Billy's family. She described herself as a small cork tossed around the ocean. Her 18-year-old sister-in-law Elizabeth slept on the floor beside Kik's bed for many nights. Yeah, she had to run to them. At least they're showing her some human kindness. Meanwhile, her mother's like, I can't. I'm sick. Her father, in his way, tried to console her, lavishing Kik with gifts and even encouraging her to write a book. Mother and I were talking it over last night, old Joe cabled her, and decided that nobody in the world 25 years of age has had the kind of life you've had, or as interesting. If you haven't kept a good diary of all this material, you've robbed yourself of another thrill, and that is writing a book. I'm sure you could make enough out of that to buy all the clothes and jewelry you want in Paris for many a year, and in addition, have a most interesting contribution to be made in our literary field. Old Joe always angling for how to make more money. The girl is literally in grief. Her brother is dead. Her husband is dead. Maybe just let her be sad for a second without being like, how can we make money out of this? Oh, let's make hay while the sun shines. He sent her a diamond and sapphire watch. He bought an airplane so he could see Kik more frequently, and he gave her his ultimate gift, his blessing for her to stay in England among Billy's family and friends without guilt. She was free, finally, and at great cost, of the Kennedy directive. She was a lone daughter Joe encouraged to be independent and rebellious, ineffably herself, perhaps because he saw his best qualities reflected in her. Kik was unlike any of the Kennedy girls, Rosemary especially with her needs and limitations. Above all, Joe wanted Kik to find love again. So London it was, and with that decision Kik embarked on her life's second act. 2 days after what would have been her and Billy's first wedding anniversary, the war ended, and 1 year after that she met Lord Peter Fitzwilliam, at a ball given for the elite wartime unit known as the Commandos, established at Churchill's request after the evacuation at Dunkirk. Fitzwilliam eyeballed Kik, slim and elegant in a soft pink gown, then asked her to dance, his wife Olive's presence notwithstanding. Oh, Kik, we can be free, but let's not get into this sort of freedom. Let's not be routing about in other folks' married relationships to find partners. Kik and Fitzwilliam's connection was instant and intense. Her father and brothers had no problem dating married women. Why should moral standards for her be any different? You would have to ask yourself that. More importantly, whether she was conscious of it or not, for Kik, a dalliance with a married man meant a natural end. She could give of herself only what she could afford to lose. There'd be no chance of a devastating heartbreak as with Billy. Billy. Kik was still living with her in-laws, clinging to her old life. There were days, she said, when she felt Billy had been dead 6 years, others 6 seconds. She was actively grieving still, but Fitzwilliam sparked something in her. Tall, dark, and 10 years Kik's senior, he was a star on London's social set. Convivial, stylish, brave, a war hero, exceedingly wealthy, dangerous. He liked fast cars, fast boats, and fast women. His family owned mansions in England and Ireland. He had a private plane. He bought racehorses and summered on the French Riviera. He could provide Kik with the travel and luxury to what she was accustomed. And Fitzwilliam was more like her father and Jack than any man she'd ever met. He had infamously abandoned Olive on their honeymoon for another woman. See, wait a second. If you know that about a man, why would you get involved? Any joker who's going to leave his wife on the honeymoon, and isn't that kind of like standard fare for the worst men? It feels like every time you hear about like the worst kind of guy, there's always a story of him being a buffoon on the honeymoon, being a fool, being a like the horrible monster on the honeymoon. It's like a trademark. What do you get involved with this guy for, Kik? He brought his mistresses home for dinner or shooting weekends and paraded them in front of his wife, whose job was to make sure that they were well fed and cared for. And when Olive decompensated and became an alcoholic, she was blamed for making Fitzwilliam's life a misery, not the other way around. Really, who could blame a wealthy, dashing war hero for his many love affairs and one-night stands when he had such a difficult wife at home? We as a society really, we do kind of have a problem with that. Like letting men do whatever and then being like, oh, it's because his wife is so harsh. She's unpleasant. You know, it's like, yeah, I know he shouldn't be running around. It's not a positive, but I don't really blame him. Like, how can we never see that maybe the reason that the person is difficult is this joker over here can't, keep his pants on? Make any of us difficult if we were married to that. Kik was supposed to be another fling, but as it turned out, she was different. She was enthralled to Fitzwilliam, intellectually and sexually. As their affair deepened, Kik confided only in Jack, who listened raptly and came away thrilled for Kik, but sad for himself. He'd never been in love like that. He doubted he ever would. Kik's friends and confidants, however, were alarmed. She was beginning to openly talk about marrying Fitzwilliam, which no one thought was a good idea. Their mutual friend, Evelyn Waugh, the esteemed writer and himself a devout Catholic, tried to talk her out of it. "If you want to commit adultery or fornication and can't resist, do it," he wrote her. "But realize what you are doing, and don't give the final insult of apostasy." Preach it. Her brother-in-law, Andrew Cavendish, was against it, as was the aristocrat David Ormsby Gore, who would one day go on to romance another young widow named Jackie Kennedy. Ormsby Gore told Kik that marrying Fitzwilliam would be a terrible mistake, that he was far too selfish and would make Kik's life hell. And to Rose, well, Fitzwilliam was an even worse choice than Billy. He wasn't only just a Protestant, but a soon-to-be divorced one. If Kik married him, Rose said, she would consider her daughter well and truly dead. Her mother's threat, the ugliest yet, did not have the desired effect. If anything, Kik drew closer to her father, certain that he would never abandon her. And indeed, Joe agreed to meet Kik and Peter in Paris, at the Ritz, on a Saturday afternoon in May. To celebrate, she and Peter decided to fly to Cannes before Paris. Kik was so excited that she packed 2 suitcases for 3 days, a wardrobe reflective of the sexual sophisticate that she'd become, expensive negligées and lacy underwear, heirloom jewelry gifted by the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire, a black garter belt, a douche, her birth control. No longer did Kik think contraception was murder, or that sex, as the Catholic Church and her mother believed, was only for procreation. Billy's death and her mother's hypocrisy, just how Christian was it to disown your daughter for falling in love, had dislodged all that doctrine. Kik knew how fragile life was now, and had no intention of sacrificing a thing. She had been through a crucible and emerged a woman of the world, so well regarded that she hosted Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen of England, and her sister Princess Margaret at the Cavendish estate. In a round-robin letter to her family back home dated October 20th, 1946, Kik wrote, "The 2 princesses arrived last night just before tea. They are very sweet. But Princess Elizabeth is very royal and very hard to talk to. She has a sweet face but dresses so badly. Her evening clothes make her look much fatter than she really is." For all the Kennedys' ways of being that Kik shucked off, her obsession with weight and looks was not among them. For the plane ride to her father in Paris, she chose a sleek, dark blue suit, a strand of pearls, her rosary beads, and her wedding ring. As in love as she was now, Billy was always with her. Can I just say, before we move on, that if you, as a parent of faith, want your children to follow in your stead, you better not be a hypocrite. There is nothing that drives a child out of the embrace of faith as a parent's hypocrisy. It's as simple as that. If you want them to believe that what you're saying matters, you have to live like it matters. You have to treat people with respect if you're going to preach that the doctrine of your faith says respect is important and love and all of these things. To be so hard-headed as to drive your daughter away because of a difference of opinion is ridiculous. And now, I mean, Kik was making bad choices. Getting involved with a married man who you know is over here whining and dining all these other women who have thrust his affairs into his wife's face over and over and over again. He's going to do the same thing to you. There's no way he wouldn't do the same thing to you. So no, she's not making good decisions. She's making terrible decisions. But why would she embrace the tenets of the faith that her parents say is so important to them when her parents are consistently breaking the tenets of that faith? They drove her into this lifestyle. Yes, she has agency of her own. She can make her own decisions. She's an adult. But it rings real hollow, all the things that you say are important to you, when your hypocrisy is screaming so loudly in your child's face. All right, we're almost done. On May 14th, 1948, upon landing in Paris at 12:45 p.m., Peter whisked Kik off to an impromptu lunch at Café de Paris. They returned to the airport nearly 3 hours later, flushed and buzzed from their leisurely boozy meal. To Fitzwilliam's consternation, Peter Townsend, their pilot, was refusing to fly. A massive storm had grounded all commercial flights. Fitzwilliam's plane was a tiny thing, a 2-engine, 10-seater with 2 recently repaired propellers. Meteorologists had forbidden a takeoff. Fitzwilliam insisted. The last 20 minutes of that flight was so terrifying that everyone on board likely knew they were going to die. Their pilot lost communication with ground control and flew into the storm's eye. He couldn't tell if the plane was upside down, right side up, or pulling toward the skies or plummeting to earth. A wing was shorn off. One engine fell, and then the other. The tail detached. The little plane gained speed as it headed straight for a mountain. It took first responders 4 hours to reach the crash site. Kik's high heels had flown off her feet and landed near the wreckage. Co-pilot Arthur Freeman, who had heroically tried to pull the plane out of its death spiral, had nearly lost a finger in the attempt. He was found, like Townsend, with devastating head wounds and a handkerchief stuffed in his mouth, a final desperate act meant to preserve the tongue upon impact. Fitzwilliam was unrecognizable. Kick was found strapped into her seat, her back, her legs, pelvis, and jaw smashed. The wedding ring from Billy was still on her finger. Joe Kennedy immediately took a train to the small French region to identify Kick. Before leaving, he memorialized his beloved daughter in his diary, which he doubtless knew would be published after her death, and what he wrote was, Hotel George V, Paris, May 14th, 1948. No one who ever knew her didn't feel that life was much better than that minute. And probably we know so little about the next world that we must think that they wanted just such a wonderful girl for themselves. We must not feel sorry for her, but for ourselves. File JPK on Kick. Written by me 1/2 hour after notified of Kick's death. It's kind of weird the way he wrote that entry, file JPK on Kick, like he clearly thought someone was going to read his diary, which those are never very reliable. The Kennedys made arrangements to bring Kick's body home. Her in-laws, with whom she had still been living at the time, offered to bury Kick in their own family plot. Joe agreed, and was the only Kennedy to attend Kick's funeral. Jack was too distraught. Rose took Kick's death as proof that she had been right. God had struck down her daughter, the sinner, the sexual savage. Rose flat out refused to attend Kick's funeral and said Kick would be denied heaven and stuck in purgatory. Lem Billings was perhaps the only non-Kennedy to know Rose's true feelings. For her, he said, that plane crash was God pointing his finger at Kick and saying, no. Kick was buried alone in the English countryside. Her gravestone reads, in loving memory of Kathleen, 1920 to 1948. She was given no last name. And so that is the end of Kick's story. Rose, I understand that she had it hard being married to old Joe, and I know that at one point she tried to leave Joe. We'll read about Rose. Rose has a chapter of her own. But Rose was, I feel like, as abusive as the father was, in her own way. She was devastatingly abusive in the way that she dealt with their children. The coldness that she showed, the unkindness, the constant need to control them with religion. And like, just hear what I'm saying here. I am a devout Christian. I believe in all the traditional tenets of the faith. I believe the Bible word for word. Like, I am not dumping on Christianity. What I'm dumping on is the use of Christianity to manipulate people and the twisting of the truth in order to subjugate people. I have a real problem with that, because that is what it means to use God's name in vain, as I've said over and over and over. And that's why it is so, that's why that's one of the 10 commandments. Do not use the Lord's name in vain. It means manipulating people and saying, God wants you to do this. God would be mad at you. This is who God is. And all of those things are man-made descriptions of who God is in order to subjugate people to your opinion. It's evil. And that's like the breaking apart of this mother-daughter relationship occurred because the Lord's name was used in vain. So I'm not dumping on religion. I'm not dumping on Christianity. I'm dumping on the idea that you use God to get what you want and to manipulate others. And then in the end, she drove her daughter far away from the religion. So if her whole purpose was, I want to keep you close. I want to keep you close to our Catholic faith. She did the very opposite and drove her into the arms of this savage who's over here having affairs with all manner of people, parading his mistresses all over the place. It's like, I'm not wholly saying that was Rose's fault, because again, Kick is an adult and had to make her own decisions in life. But what I'm saying is, if you were raised with the kind of hypocrisy that Kick was raised with, it is logical to see that the end result will be your daughter is going to go and live a lifestyle that you don't condone, and that you condemn. But in your clutching and controlling way, you ended up controlling right into the life that you didn't want for her. And that's because of hypocrisy. So anyway, I was very saddened by Kick's story. These stories are just getting worse and worse. But I will see you guys later. And I think that the next time we come together, let's read Rose's story, because we've seen Rose and have her hand in both of these daughters' stories, and it's been a little bit discouraging to say the least. We do get some background on who Rose was. Maybe we can humanize her in a way. As annoying and as grating as I find Rose to be, I also want to dig down to her humanity and what life had been like to create this sort of like hard-shelled, unkind woman. I'm sure as a little tiny girl, I'm sure that she was not just this mean person who would have done the things later in life that we're seeing her do. But the coldness that she shows towards her children is wild to me. So let's see if we can't find out why. I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the comments. Bye.